So on that, I'll turn it over to my friend Susie Huang.
Thank you, Peter. Can everyone hear me? Great. I am going to start by asking each of the panelists to give a short intro of themselves so that everyone has the context of how they're coming to this topic, and then I'll kick off with questions. So, Professor?
Okay, my name is Bruce Greenwald. I teach value investing, business strategy, and globalization with Joe Stiglitz at Columbia.
I'm Peter Hawthorne. I lead corporate development and play a governance role at Cargill. For some, Cargill is not a well-known name. 152-year-old private company engaged in ag, food, industrial, logistics, financial, 110 billion in sales, operations in 70 countries, sales to 200 countries, 155,000 employees, probably 75 to 100 different businesses, very diverse.
Hi, I'm Nathaniel Karp, and I'm the chief economist for BBVA Compass.
Hi everyone, Ann Madden. I'm the general counsel for Honeywell, but I have to confess I've only been in that role for about 3.5 seconds. Prior to that, I ran our M&A function for Honeywell for the last 16 years, and also know Peter and Susie for a very long time, going way back. Honeywell is a $40 billion revenue company, very diversified in our product offerings, 130,000 employees operating in about 160 countries around the world, and at an interesting juncture in our journey, pivoting to a really new strategy. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that.
Hi, I'm Amol. I'm a startup founder. I started some companies over the years, Virgin Mobile and Peak and Halo Neuroscience. The company that I've been building the last couple years is in real estate. It's a bit different from the other ones. It's called Knotel. We do agile headquarters. So we run about 50 buildings in New York and London and San Francisco. And we serve real companies, but with the agility and scalability and flexibility that you might have learned about from co-working or professional suites.
Thank you. So we obviously have a very diverse set of panelists here, and I have to say we're going to attack, I think, a very complex problem. So I'm glad I'm moderating and not answering, because I don't have the answers. But I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists maybe to level set for us and answer 2 questions, just so that we have the right background. And number one, as we talk about changing demographics, I think it's important for everybody to actually define their customer base. So, you know, we're not talking necessarily about companies that are addressed directly to the consumer. So I'd like to understand how you think about, is your end consumer your customer base when you think about demographics, or are you thinking of the in-between buyer, which then goes to an end product? So that's number one. How do you define that? And then who drives that change, and how has that changed over the last 5 years, that base, versus what you expect over the next 5 years? Is that pace of change accelerating? I know that's a bunch of questions, but I wanted to get the definition out there. So why don't I start with them all at the opposite end?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we run workplaces for companies, and so the people have to work there. I mean, they're the user and the customer, and it's not just the people who are the staff of companies. It is the company's investors and customers. Your headquarters has a lot of stakeholders. The decision maker is the CEO, ultimately, weirdly. They don't often have great expertise in medium-sized organizations, and even in very large ones, it ends up a very technical decision-making process, like choosing a firewall, when in fact the decisions are much more complex than simply technical decisions. It is about workplace culture and life. And we are observing a massive sea change. The sea change is kind of boring. It's familiar. You guys know about it and complain about it pretty often, I assume. It's open office. That's been well underway. It's still only 10 or 20% penetrated in the North American office market, so we're not even there. There's still a lot of offices and cubicles all around North America and Europe. But I think what we at Knotel are working on, apart from deploying open offices for companies, is already a next generation that you can see in some companies. And I guess our term for it is agile. What we try to do is let companies change the space, but also to program and run the space in a way that's more interesting and rewarding for their people. There are things that you used to think HR would do that happen at the site of your company headquarters. There are things like learning and networking and discovery of new ideas. And we program some of that stuff with some of our partners like Microsoft or Starbucks or Body Shop, which use us for big offices around New York.
Anne?
So for Honeywell, the way we define our customer today, and we're morphing that definition a little bit as we go, is really our industrial customer. And so in our business, our real core competency is the products and the solutions that we sell to the industrial customer. So it's very much a B2B model. There are aspects of our business where we have a B2C model, and indeed, you know, the end consumer is the group of buyers that is driving our immediate defined customer base to change very rapidly. It has been changing over the last 5 years, will change dramatically again in the next 5 to 10 years. And in fact, our shifting customer focus, as we defined it, has driven us to take a strategic change in our portfolio, and we're in the process of spinning out about $8 billion of revenue, most of that being a very much B2C retail sale-oriented part of our businesses that we believe from a business model perspective will be much healthier and grow faster on their own when they can uniquely focus on that go-to-market model. But our industrial customer base has really felt the impact of the demand of their own end customer, which has driven us to a place where everything needs to be connected. Historically, Honeywell has been a producer of a physical product. Today, we are a producer of a solution that at all times is connecting the physical world with the digital world in terms of the solution. And that's very much our focus today, is where can we add value to our industrial customer base, where we have very deep domain knowledge and can craft an informational solution for them to help them meet their own demands on efficiency, productivity, asset utilization, safety, security, et cetera.
Thank you.
Well, in our space, BBVA is a financial sector company. And basically, I think there are three key components here. One is obviously the slowing population growth and how that affects the slower growth overall. The second issue is the changes in customer experience driven by new technologies. And the third one would be disintermediation from competitors, both from non-banks and also from incumbents and new entrants. So on the slowing population growth, basically what we have and what you've heard this morning is the slower fertility rate, which causes slower population growth, and that fits into slower economic growth. Just to give you an idea, net wealth creation, which has been growing at about 4.5%, is expected to grow at about 1.5% in the next few decades. And this imposes significant challenges, particularly in the developed world and mostly in the US, because we've been dependent on external savings to finance our current accounts. And so if we're creating less wealth, both domestically and worldwide, obviously this creates challenges in terms of where the funds are going to come to finance investment and growth. And in the midst of this, we also have an aging population process which creates a lot of pressures on fiscal finances, retirement plans, and so on. And this is where the efficient resource allocation has to kick in to provide better returns to those lower savings or slower wealth. And part of the challenge for us as financial sector participants is to help that resource allocation. And with the new technologies, obviously, that's going to be a major driver. But in terms of the changing consumer, what we all know is that people are expecting the same sort of service that they're getting across other industries in the financial services. And that means basically millisecond response times in a very transparent, clear, and efficient environment. And that's a huge challenge for financial companies. And the third issue that I mentioned, which is basically the disintermediation, is how do you adapt to these changes in the ecosystem. So rather than just looking at the more traditional branch banking model, we're now seeing a complete reshaping of the borders that are taking place in the financial sector. So non-financial companies providing banking services, that is not necessarily the case in the US, but it's a growing trend in Asia, for example. And so we need to think about our services and products not only from the old traditional model, but in a changing environment where those borders are going to continue reshaping the financial industry.
Interested in your answer, because I think of Cargill as somewhere between B2B and B2C.
Indeed, and I think in a traditional measure, the majority of our businesses are B2B, although we do have some B2C businesses. If you enjoy using Trivia in your coffee and tea, that's a Cargill product. But I think this is a complex question, and the answer is complex. Because we work across a breadth of supply chains. Our customers are across all of those supply chains. And so it's the farmer to whom we supply crop inputs and buy their grains or their product or their livestock. Of course, it's food manufacturing and food service companies to whom we sell the breadth of our food products. But it's also the consumer to which we are ultimately providing safe, nutritious food and food ingredients. Even more complex than that, it's the breadth of stakeholders who enable us to do all of that. So an example is we operate a business globally. We manufacture cocoa products and chocolate. So there are no agricultural extension universities in Ghana or the Ivory Coast. We train thousands of smallholder farmers. We do so with the agreement and support of the government and NGOs, like the Gates Foundation. Those stakeholders are our customers. They allow us freedom to operate. Likewise, the breadth of communities in which we operate and do so safely with appropriate employment. So there's a breadth of complexity across this now. We're stakeholders, the breadth of stakeholders who enable us to do what we do are effectively our customers.
My next question is going to be.
Oh, I was going to talk about
Yes,
my
please.
business. We are heroically indifferent to trends. Because in my time, notwithstanding everything everybody is talking about remote education, we have gone from turning down 2 out of every 3 customers to turning down 5 out of every 6 customers. And we are fat, happy, and indifferent.
I always like a defiant answer. Before I dig in a little bit to more specific questions, I know there are some polling devices on the tables. Does everybody have those? And I hope you're instructed on how to use them. I wanted to just ask 2 quick questions. Do I need to provide instruction? I think I'm going to ask 2 questions that ask you on a scale of 1 to 10. And I just want to get a sense from the audience, because you heard some of the challenges everyone's dealing with. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a challenge to your business is changing consumer demographics, with 1 being not challenging, 10 being very challenging? I assume the answer is going to, oh, real time. I don't know. The answer looks to me kind of medium-ish, which I find interesting, because I know, at least at Morgan Stanley, I think it's pretty challenging. Let me ask my second question. which is, as you think about adapting to those changes, what is your best resource for dealing with that? Do you find you have the resources internally to address those changes, or do you find yourselves needing to go outside to get outside help, consultants, services, with one being all internal and 10 being all external? So mostly external. It looks to me like a lot of external help. Interesting. I mean, I would say that's true for us as well. So I would like to ask my next question to Professor Greenwald. Before we go to some of the specific companies, you are an investing and strategy expert. So I see, I'm afraid you are. I see that although you are indifferent to change, obviously companies can't be indifferent to change. And so as you think about how you look at the market and grade companies, which I assume is part and parcel of your work, how do you grade companies on their ability to adapt to change? Is it something you do specifically, and do you look at history? How do you?
Yeah, I think, look, it is a hugely difficult issue. But can I say something first about the issue of demographics here? What's driving the demographic change is actually not population change. What you've seen is we've gone through from the Second World War really until about 15 years ago, enormous demographic changes, and they're going away. I mean, we're going much more back to a stable population, older population distribution. But as technology has changed, there are enormous changes in the competitive environment for addressing those consumers. And the big change is this, and I'm going to start talking sort of historically. In the Depression, the big problem was that agriculture, that at that time employed much more than half the global population, died. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It died because agricultural productivity growth under the aegis of things like the Agricultural Extension Service was growing at 5 to 6% a year, and global agricultural demand was growing at maybe 2% a year. And that meant you had to move all the people off the farms, and that shows up in consumption. So that as part of that change, in 1970, the average US family spent 23% of its income on food, 18% of it was groceries, and 5% of it was restaurant meals. Today, as that revolution has continued, the average US family spends 14% of its income on food, 5% on restaurant meals, and only 9% on groceries. That's an enormous change, but it's productivity driven. It's not actually demographically driven. What's going on now, and has been going on for a long time, that has made a huge difference is manufacturing is dying. And it's dying for the same reason that agriculture died, which is productivity growth is on the order of, when you really look carefully at the manufacturing processes themselves, 5 to 6%, and global demand, because it's not what people spend money on incrementally, is growing much more slowly. So people are desperately pursuing an inherently smaller market. And as you heard from the last speaker, everybody, notably China and emerging markets, are trying to export their way out of that problem. But what it means is that manufacturing goods are getting cheaper, they're getting less important, and competition is intensifying in that market. So what companies have had to do is to adapt, and I think you heard a lot of that on this panel, to being service businesses. And that is really hard to do because it means dealing on a continuous basis with customers who they very often not dealt with firsthand. And that's very hard for people to read, and you see it in the difficulties that people have had moving across borders, and you see it in the difficulty that people have had adapting to new customers like teenage tastes. And I think the model there is, again, interestingly enough, going to have to be a manufacturing model, not a marketing model. And the one I think about is when you look at fashion companies, that have gone global, only one of them has been truly successful. Benetton is a disaster. H&M is in the process of becoming a disaster. Zara is the one that succeeded. And the way Zara succeeded is they don't try and guess what the consumers want. They do trial and error. So they put crap out there, and what sells, they rapidly produce a lot more of. And I think that it is going to be easier for these companies to adapt to that than to actually read these alien cultures as both the nature of their customers, the nature of the competition in those markets, and the global markets that they go after change.
But that's in and of itself an answer, right? Because I believe Zara's on a 6-week cycle.
Oh, no, that's exactly right.
They conceive of an idea, and in 6 weeks, it's in the store.
Oh, no, they're better than that. I mean, they put out a book of potential designs. The local store managers decide what to order. They provide much less than the local store managers ask for. So if they make a big mistake, or the local store manager makes a big mistake, they'll still probably sell out most of the time anyway. And the stuff that, you know, there's big demand for, which they didn't anticipate, they produce, I think it's less than a 6-week cycle these days.
I'm sure they've
I mean, they respond really quickly. And with highly automated, decentralized manufacturing, those possibilities are increasing around the world.
So are you able to, so back to my original question, when you look at a company, do you look for something specific? Are you able to predict who's going to be good at?
Yes. What we're looking for is local geographic focus. Because, you know, when people say, oh, there are these broad global demographic trends, forget that. That consumers, except for high-end consumers, and the high-end consumers in this room, like everybody else, generalizes from their own irrelevant experience. And high-end consuming is a global market, but other markets are very local. And you have to adapt locally, and I think that's what you look for. So I'll give you the example of this. Making tractors is a tough business. That Deere has recognized that fact, just like making construction equipment is a tough business. What Deere has done is it's concentrated on dominating local markets and offering a local package in the software that runs these tractors and machines, because nobody's in them, the repair and replacement and support, because they got to work, because they're replacing human beings, in financing and in secondhand markets, because these machines are much more durable. When they are 90% of a local market, that infrastructure that they have has economies of scale that can wipe out their competition. And it's people who do that that I think are going to do really well, and then behind it adapt very quickly on the manufacturing side, as opposed to people like Caterpillar, whose headquarters is in Geneva, whose service headquarters is in Geneva for tax reasons.
Okay. I'm going to go to Peter, because you've been talking about agriculture and a natural follow-on. You know, I know a little bit about Cargill, and I think you have the challenge of your origination business, which is growing and collecting food, has to be local and is extremely information intensive. But you're trying to address an end consumer, which is in many different markets. It's both global, but in many local markets. But also there's been a huge change in the focus on nutrition, organic, you know, GMO or not. And so how have you seen that change your business?
Indeed, those are all happening. I think demographics is encompassing, and with respect to the global ag food system, obviously the biggest has been increase in population, but also increase in income and changing preferences for food. And part of that trend is as people have more income, they tend to substitute protein for carbohydrates, and so protein is growing faster. And protein is a very intensive product that has sustainability issues. Then as well, people, I think, with the breadth of technology, have greater access to understanding where their food comes from, and they want to know that. I mean, we've gotten away from that. A century ago, we knew where our food came from. It was from our backyard. But today, there is an interest in understanding where food comes from. What's the story behind that? How sustainable is it? Is it healthy? And so all of those things are affecting how we engage with customers and consumers in particular. So in highly developed markets, it's about ensuring safe, nutritious, transparent food, where it comes from, food with a story. Broadly across the world, in still highly developing markets, it's about serving basic needs as those change, and in particular the protein story, as I mentioned.
It's it's a moving target, right?
Indeed.
And I would think that as people look to have different types of food segregated, that has to have production implications.
Very much so. So, a big part of the global food system that ensures food security is that countries and regions grow what they're good at growing and producing. And so we all benefit from fresh fruit in the wintertime. While we certainly don't grow that in New York, it comes from the Southern Hemisphere. And parts of the world that don't have the ability to grow things that are basic grains, the Middle East as an example, are very large importers. And so that system still has to work and has to provide that transparency. That said, it has to work. And so I think trade issues are foremost on people's minds about ensuring that. And yet, people want local. So there's a greater complexity with respect to how we want and source our food today.
And so what kind of lead time do you build into those types of changes?
Well, in serving the large flows that really are the bulk of what the food system is all about. So, for example, primary grains sourced in places like Brazil and Argentina that find their way to China or the Middle East, it takes a while for that system to be built and to respond. That said, price will affect what the farmer chooses to do and plant. And so typically it's on a seasonal basis that response happens. I think, in regard to developing foods that are better with respect to whether it's nutrition or taste and texture, the science and the work behind that, but more importantly, the testing and the proving and the gaining of acceptance of that are increasingly complex and take time. So there are a breadth of novel foods that are coming out. There's all sorts of excitement about food tech, but it's about consumer acceptance. And the consumer has to understand, buy in, try it, and say that we'll support it and that be part of their social network.
Thank you. We're gonna switch gears to the financial world. I mean, banking is something that has changed so much, and it changes for such a large population. So as you think about how tomorrow's 20-year-olds are going to deal with their financial needs, how do you think about the demographics as you go into planning for change? You are also B2C more than some of the other panelists. So how do you focus on technology and develop practices for the next 5 to 10 years? Or 20?
Yeah. Well, as we know, millennials will become the largest group in society, even though baby boomers will be larger than under 18, the group under 18. So these demographics are, on the one hand, mean the aging of the population, but also this larger group of very tech-savvy consumers, the millennials, that are demanding a different type of interaction with financial services firm. As I mentioned before, it's about transparency, efficiency, and I think most of all is about trust. And this is where I think the data and the data analytics come into play, where you have these large amounts of data and you need to dive deep into the data in a very efficient way to create actionable responses based on this data to help our customers make better decisions. The stress that comes from personal finance is one of the worst that you can have. And so by helping people to make better decisions, we're helping our customers. And how do you link all these forces or trends? And I think this is where the data analytics and all that's going on in machine learning and deep learning and algorithms, you have to create a very efficient model in gathering the data, understanding the data, and having an ability to respond relatively quickly. And that basically implies changing the culture of the business. So what we're doing, at least in BBVA, is basically transforming the way we operate. We need to think in terms of very rapid responses, very efficient, break the silos, and combine people from different segments and expertise in providing very quick responses. So all this is about collaboration, the agile working environment, the open APIs. That's mostly internally, and it has to come with a very strong belief from top management to set the example and cascade this down to the last employee. We currently have about 5,000 people already working in the agile environment, and that's going to continue growing. We're training thousands of employees in terms of data analytics, data specialists, and creating these databases so that as we move forward, we can deliver the customer experience that everybody is expecting, but mostly millennials. And I think I want to stress the importance of trust, because at the end, people have to trust us in allowing us or consenting to use the data. Maybe the US is undergoing some changes here and transformation, and we've seen that with what happened with Facebook and so on. But in Europe, for example, the initiatives in terms of payments and data ownership and so on, it's moving ahead to the point where I think probably the US will eventually end up. And we need to be very efficient and very transparent in how we use that data, gain the trust of the customer, gain that consent, and use that data to provide a much better service.
So it kind of relates to cycle time, and I'm gonna, you can see I'm moving down the panel here, but I'm gonna go to Anne, because I think of Honeywell as really a technology company. I mean, you make physical things, but I would think that this concept of cycle time, and then we were having a conversation about cybersecurity in the green room, which was, if you want to be truly frightened, we can talk about that later. But just in terms of how you design and sell technology and what your customers are looking for, that cycle time must have shortened, and how do you deal with that challenge?
Yeah. It's an important question, and it's wrapped up in everything that we do. Our company runs on data, and data drives everything we do. And you know, we have a very different business than the bank model, obviously, but there are a lot of commonalities, I think, in what's driving what we do. What's changed for us very dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years in running our own business, and bear in mind, we have a massive manufacturing footprint around the world and a massive supply chain in which there is a ton of working capital wrapped up into that, and increasing demands not only on our own managing of our own assets, but managing the assets of our customers. And it's been an interesting thing to witness how data and data analytics have driven everything we do to make our own company and our own operations more productive, more efficient, better clock speed, better scale, better automation, better speed in everything we do, and smarter in everything we do, and then translating the capability that we've developed on our own for our own selves into a solution for our customers, and then driving to a local adaptation of that solution depending upon where in the world we operate. And it's all about the data. We're a massive sensor manufacturer, and I'm sure you all appreciate the proliferation of sensors in our world, because those are the little guys that are pulling the data off the devices. And then coupling that with an algorithm and other IP to tag it and bucketize it and make it make sense and turn it into something of value, both for ourselves in diagnosing our own optimization, but then selling that as a service to our customers. It's been fascinating to watch that migration. But it's tricky, of course, and the chapter is long from over in terms of how this is going to play out over time. Gathering all that data, both our own data off our own plants and our own devices, and then gathering the data in the field that is with our massive installed base of devices with our customers, and then where does that go, and who owns that? And do you need to own it, or do you just need the rights to use it? And how do you use it? And all of this is all being written real time, and is a big challenge. And then you raise the data privacy implications, which is a brand new frontier. You know, it's coming, and it's coming hard. And May 25th, the global data privacy rights will be in effect in the EU, but it's coming, and it's bigger, and it's not just a one-time thing. This is going to get more complicated as life goes on, and it's just been a really fascinating transformation for us as we figure out how to do this and navigate all the increasing demands for our customers around the world, and then there's cybersecurity on top of all of it. So not just safety and security of people, but safety and security of your customers, their data, and how to protect that. So interesting times in our transformation.
Is there anyone else for whom the word cybersecurity makes you feel like you want to pull the covers over your head? 'Cause that's how I feel when I hear about it. I'm going to go to Amol next, because I understand how current and of the moment the business model is that Amol has in his company. But I have to confess that I feel this existential threat to my office, which I love. And I understand that's not how a lot of offices work anymore, but I don't know where else I would store the 200 trees I've cut down to create the paper that I have in my office. But I guess I wanted to just hear a little bit about how you think about how the modern office works. And this is two different things. One is, you know, we were talking in the green room, Peter was saying at Cargill, which is, as he said,
152
years old. They've gone to a hot desk, and I'm sure there are people here who have the hot desk concept in their offices, where you don't have a desk, you have a laptop, and you move around and find a place. I assume people kind of have their favorite places they scurry to. But I think the extreme example is something like Knotel, and so I'd like to hear about that and find out when I'm losing my office.
Yeah, there are a lot of dumb ideas in office, and actually they were generated probably generated by the head of real estate at Cargill, not by me, and deployed against the will of your people, not by me. And if your business unit head or your headquarters decision maker took a credit card out or called me, I'd put all their people at a Knotel and do it the way they like to do it. And so the thing to distinguish between are the trends and fads in the build out of offices, from like the hallway corridor suites to the cubicles to the open office, or even to sillier things. Those trends separate that from thinking about how is it implemented in the organization. Oddly, companies have real estate departments. However, the CEO presses a button and gets in a lift, deploys performance marketing through Google and only pays for results, has huge on-demand teams of consultants or engineers, and yet somehow believes that building a $5 billion building on 47th and Park Avenue, if you're JP Morgan, is the sort of right and natural use of balance sheet capital, and internal expertise. This is a bizarre fantasy that we will laugh at in the years to come, and we laugh at currently in my office. So just don't do it. I mean, there is no reason to sign a lease for an office. You don't buy any other thing with so little flexibility, where the seller calls you a ridiculous term from the era of serfdom, tenant, rather than customer, and ends their relationship with you the moment you sign the paper and wire the money. They're gone. They will not answer the phone. I think it's a category that is certainly very local. I was quite interested on Bruce's commentary there. There are only 10 cities in the West that we care about, North America and Europe, that have 5 billion square feet of office worth $5 trillion. Just those 10 cities. The dynamics in these 10 super cities, actually, because if you think about the 1,000-year trends that matter, it's the rise of cities. That's one of them. Cities are more valuable and work way better now than they ever did. There was a setback with the car, but the internet has made cities work far better than anyone imagined. I think people thought we'd be moving to Montana, but we haven't. High revenue per headcount jobs are in cities, and it is a political problem that there are low revenue per headcount jobs outside of cities. But cities are working better than they ever did, and part of what's making them work is the information coordination and transactional efficiency that has come from technology, and our business does that for office. There are other businesses that do that for pizza or taxis, and I think it is a vision of the future that's well on its way.
I guess I'd ask a question to whoever wants to answer in the group about talent. And I don't know about everyone in the audience, but I think attracting and retaining talent seems to be one of the challenges of the next, the next decade here. And when you think about changing demographics, we were talking about consumer, but how do you think about that with respect to talent?
Oh, let me just add one sentence just to cap on it, because on talent, I mean, that is the reason why large enterprises have been choosing us, for example, to put like a creative studio or an innovation center or some business unit they just bought that they didn't want to bring inside the Borg at headquarters. And talent and retention, but also then attracting wonderful people that come and bring great ideas. I guess some of them want hot desks, and you'll have to give them a hot desk somewhere, or a cafeteria, or a nap pod or something. And facilitating that transformation is sort of difficult from the monolithic center through which decisions have traditionally been made on some topics, like the workspace itself, but certainly engineering practices or go-to-markets or the use of data. I think talent, when they show up and they can't use their iPhone or they can't use Gmail and they have to use this other thing, this next generation of talent that you're cultivating, these are problems to solve. Talent is hugely important.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that, because I think that you got to be really careful. The people who are telling you that talent is important, and they give you bad advice in a lot of dimensions. So they say when you deal with your workers, you got to let them pursue their dream. When you deal with your workers, you've got to let them do work-life balance. Well, the people for whom that was true is my generation, because we were the leading edge of the baby boom. And we did well meeting that model. We were scarce in the global economy. And that's all changed. There are tons of people out there compared to that particular generation. And they're going to have to suck it up. And the one thing that we know about talent is that it does a lot better as a specialized talent than as a generalized talent. And I'll give you the example that was brought home to me. I taught intermediate microeconomics to a kid called Bill Belichick at Wesleyan University. And he was a straight B- student. And he took that B- intelligence and focused it entirely on football and became probably the greatest football coach in history. So I think when you talk about talent, you've also got to talk, and I think this was brought up in sort of the mastery versus genius debate, how you're going to deploy that talent. And you're going to have to deploy it in a locally specialized way, in a functionally specialized way. And I think that's what you're going to have to accommodate.
Yeah, for us, talent is a huge challenge. And the competition for the unique and special talent that we need to be able to deploy our strategies going forward is intense. And we may be guilty of doing some of the gimmicky office space things to attract some of that talent, like having foosball and ping pong and free food and beer on tap in the common areas, and you can come and go as you wish in this open environment, or you can be in your PJs or whatever you want. But I think what's really worked for us so far is having what Bruce referred to as these really clustered, intense, specialized pods. We call them centers of excellence, or COEs, where you can have software engineers who are working in teams on exactly the same thing and driving to one goal in a specific space where they make it their own and they're driving to a very specific solution. But it keeps me up at night. Millennials are demanding, and we say just suck it up. Damn, I would love for them to just suck it up, but they are resisting sucking it up, and they are extremely demanding, and they're happy to leverage their capabilities to just move from place to place to place without a lot of loyalty. So it's a significant challenge for us today, particularly in the world of engineering, where fewer engineers are coming out of the university system, and software engineers are in extreme demand and can go to a lot cooler companies than Honeywell or Cargill. So it's a big issue.
Yeah,
Well, I think Cargill is a cool company.
Well, no offense intended.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So at the macro level, one thing that it's coming up in the data is that just as previous generations, the high-skilled millennials' income, or the income gap is widening with respect to millennials that are lower performing. So this is already in the making, so it's no different than previous generations. You have, if you compare top performers against the average, you get about a 400% more productivity growth. And then at the very top, so the top 1% top performers, it's about 800% higher productivity growth. In the financial sector, I think the biggest challenge, like other industries, is basically how do you attract this talent when the financial sector has taken such a bad reputation, and that's a big challenge. So part of the answer, I think, has to be about offering a different working environment. It has to be a different business purpose. It has to be about compensation also, training, and so on. So in our case, we have 135,000 people working at BBVA around the world. It's very different to train all these people, but eventually it's something that we're beginning to do. We also partner with companies outside the financial sector that provide talent that it's not available in-house or even in the financial industry, M&A, joint ventures, venture capital, all different sort of options, just not for talent, but also technology and different innovation and business models and products and so on. But clearly, we're big believers in talent, and I think that's going to be one of the key differentiating factors between winners and losers.
To add one or two comments, I think, to an excellent discussion. Talent have choice, and part of what we find engages talent is to be involved in something that is meaningful, to which their values align. And so things that have true social impact that they can see their hand making a difference, they're engaged. Second, career agility is really, really important. They're willing to change and move, and they want to grow. And so providing that opportunity for personal and professional growth and the opportunity to do different things and agility within the organization is very attractive to top talent.
I mean, I think it may be attractive, but it's going to cost you. I mean, let me just do the financial sector, which is what I know best. In every financial transaction, there are two sides. Somebody is always buying it because they think it's that price is going to do as an asset better than average, and that's always being sold by somebody else who thinks it's going to do worse than average, and one of them is always wrong. Now, suppose I've spent my whole life doing onshore South Texas Gulf Coast oil leases, and that's all I do, and you fly in from Spain and buy an oil lease from me on that transaction. Who do you think made money? So I love the idea of all these people trying to do everything, but even Warren Buffett does much better in the 4 industries in which he is expert. And he actually made most of his very high returns early on in life when he specialized in companies in insurance around Omaha. That you cannot throw out the importance of specialization here. Trying to read a complex global environment across lots of different industries is beyond most people's capability. And I think what you really want to offer those workers is a chance to succeed, a chance to do really well at an important job. And that means they're going to have to be the Bill Belichicks of the world who are very focused. And I don't think you can throw it out. Now, one last thing about just how hard these people are to manage. I started my career at Bell Labs. And at Bell Labs, the rule was 50% for me, 50% for Bell Labs. And that's what it took to attract talent in those days. And the reality was 80% for me, 20% for Bell Labs. Today, Google is regarded as this great institution because they let you spend 20% of your time on your own work. So I think you actually have much more control than you think you do.
My takeaway is that I'm obviously living in the dark ages because I told our young people that the business day starts at 9, that I expect you to be wearing a tie if you're a man, and that I don't want to see that football being thrown around on the floor because then I know you're not actually at the computer. But we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask just one question, and I know there were some questions from the audience, so I apologize we don't have time. But I just want to read it exactly as it is. I won't say who asked it, but for Professor Greenwald. Since Columbia is feeling fat and happy serving high-end customers with large margins, aren't you the very definition of an industry ripe for disruption by online education, according to Clayton Christensen's definition? I didn't say that.
First, Clayton Christensen was wrong about almost everything historically. So let's keep that in mind. But the second thing is, yes, we are fat and extraordinarily happy and ripe for disruption. The bad news is we've been ripe for disruption for 75 years. And our behavior, trust me, has not improved.
All right. I thought we'd get a good answer like that. So I just wanted to thank you all for listening and for responding to the polls, and thank the panelists for answering the questions. I really appreciate the discussion today.
I mean,